Security Officer Nicolino Cangemi, and today I'm going to run you through constructing and building a podcast. This is a ideal situation for when you have an audio recording from something such as a speech or a lecture, and you want to interweave it with something like a PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into this, and we're going to demonstrate creating a podcast for the Commandant's Leadership Address that was at the Coast Guard Academy in 2012. So first things first is I got a PowerPoint presentation here, and this was actually used during the leadership address. We're going to go ahead and open this up in PowerPoint, which, here we go. Move this out of the way. So here's the actual PowerPoint presentation with each of the slides, and we can go ahead and resize this. So these are all the slides that were actually used in the presentation. What we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go up to, let's see, we go up to File and Save as Pictures. And I'm going to choose a location, in this case the desktop here, and I'm going to save them as a JPEG. Hit save, and it'll automatically create a folder for me, and it says it's been saved as a separate file. We can go ahead and quit PowerPoint. We no longer need it, and what we are left with is all of the JPEG slides for each slide from the presentation, and they're individual JPEGs now, and 19 of them in all. So what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to throw that away. I actually have a copy right here. What we're going to go to next is we're going to open up GarageBand on the Mac. From this window, we're going to click on New Project. And from here, we're going to choose Podcast. We're going to go ahead and choose a location and choose a title for this. In this case, the 2012 Commandant's Leadership Address. Okay. You can go ahead and ignore all this stuff down here. It doesn't really matter. We're going to go ahead and create this, and you'll see over here it created the file, and now it opened it up. And this is our podcast. Over here we have the podcast track. This is where all of the artwork is going to go for each of the slides. And then you can also separate out if you have one or more speakers actually at an event. And of course there's a jingles track, so you can add music or whatever you wish. So first things first is I'm going to take the audio that the Commandant had, and it's an MP3 format that we recorded. I'm going to take this and drag this file over here and drop it in this male voice track. If I go back, I can see it's converting. And there it is. Now it's converted. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, the little eye here, and it's going to give me my information. I can take a look at the master track and kind of adjust the audio from this. This little slider here can zoom in or zoom out on our actual audio. And this is our waveform, and you'll see it slowly trudge along and actually build a waveform for the actual audio. So what we're going to do is, I know that this needs some editing. At the beginning of this, there was an actual movie presentation.
I become a Marine, I became a Coast Guardsman, because while inspired to serve my country, I decided I also wanted to go to sea.
So that was the movie presentation.
Coast Guard over the last couple of years.
And this is where he starts speaking.
Before I became
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I can kind of see where the audio ends.
I talked about an inflection point in my life.
Every day that I get,
Ladies and gentlemen, the Commandant.
Seats, please.
And right about there, I can see that that's where my audio is really going to begin.
Good evening, shipmates.
So that's where I like to start the audio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, and I'm going to make sure that this track is selected. I'm going to put this little guide right where I want to clip it, maybe just a little bit before, so I can have a little bit of silence. So I'm going to go up to Edit, split. You can also use the Command T key as indicated over here. And as you can see, it split the audio track right there. So now I have two different audio tracks, one that begins here.
Good evening, shipmates. I'm just standing up here.
And then we have the actual movie that was done beforehand. I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit the delete key on my keyboard. You can also go up here and hit cut or delete. Either one doesn't really matter. I'm just going to hit the delete key. And I'm going to take this and slide this down. So our new beginning, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This is our new beginning. So 10 seconds in, this is a 10-second mark, so this is about 5 seconds here. So we can see where the audio actually just starts to come in. This is the start of our presentation.
Good evening, shipmates. I'm just standing up here.
All right. So now that we have that, we can actually start looking at our podcast and what we're actually going to include. With this is, I selected our podcast track, and this is a list of all of the different things, tracks, markers, artwork, URLs, anything that we want to include in the actual podcast as chapter markers or artwork can all be done here when we have the podcast track selected. Well, first things first is I'm going to mark this as a chapter. It's going to mark it wherever the playhead's at, and this is the playhead. I'm going to make sure it's all the way at the beginning. And I'm going to choose marks a chapter, or I'm going to, add a marker. So this is our first marker. And I'm going to title this Introduction. Okay. And when you title it as a chapter, it automatically marks it as a chapter. Next thing we're going to do is I'm going to go back to my desktop. And I'm going to go back here and choose that first slide. I'm going to choose this slide. I'm going to just drag it and drop it right here on the artwork. There it is. You can see that the actual podcast track and shows the actual slide. If you want a larger view, you can just click on the little icon and it comes up. You can also double click on the icon here and you can resize or move your slide in here. Since podcast tracks are square and our slides are usually rectangular, you can go ahead and resize and move as you see appropriate. Hit set. So here we go. Now I have my track in here. I have the artwork set to display and I have a chapter marker. So let's go ahead and listen to the actual podcast and find those other spots where we can
So if I can
add
have
markers.
that first slide.
Okay, now right here we asked for the first slide.
I want to show you some of our family pictures here.
And he's
before we
talking
get
about
into the
family
comments tonight.
pictures.
This is Telfair Brown.
So what I want to do is find out where he talks about that first slide.
So if I could have that first slide.
Alright, as soon as he says that, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to add a marker. Now you can see where it splits off the actual podcast track and it makes room for another podcast. Over here I'm going to title this Meet the Coast Guard Family. Now since he's talking about the actual slide, I'm going to go back here to the Finder and I'm going to choose that second slide. Drag it over here, drop it off, and there it is. So now when it actually plays it, we can see the transition.
If I could have that first slide. I want to show you some of our family pictures here before we get into the comments tonight. This is Telfair Brown. He's a retired photojournalist from the United States Coast Guard who works with us in a civilian capacity. And I'm just proud of him because he's an artist. He's the one that put this film together that we showed to.
Okay, so there it talks about that actual slide.
No, we've got very talented special film before or taken by Petty Officer Kelly. He's a photojournalist second class this year. Most recently, we had the fair winds down to Washington.
Okay, now here's another segment where the slide actually changed. What I'm going to do is find that exact moment. I think it's around here. And I'm going to add another marker.
As well. So my interaction with the cadets this year, most recently, we had the...
Alright, so he's talking about, right about here is where that slide should change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another marker. I'm going to go back to the Finder, choose my next slide, drag that in. I'm going to leave it as that, because we're still kind of meeting the Coast Guard family. So I'm just going to let this go from picture to picture. And we can actually see that transition happen. If I click here.
But a bunch of other people as well. So my interaction with the cadets this year, most recently, we had the Fair Winds down to Washington, and they helped us out at our holiday reception at the...
So there he goes. He talks about that next slide.
We have this photo. It's one of Patrick Kelly's photos. Now, what I have to say is, real hit. Next slide.
Good audio cue. He said next slide. So we'll just add the marker and add the next slide.
One of my favorites. Now, what I have to say is for Cadet First Class Mills and Cadet First Class Cosenza,
Okay, now this is an interesting part of the audio of the Commandant's speech, where he actually talks about the history of the Coast Guard cutter Blackthorn.
third story is about sacrifice. Back in 1980.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually begin at the start of his story, which is about here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another marker. I'm going to put story 3, the Coast Guard cutter Blackthorn. I'm going to go ahead and, just like I would any other slide, I'd add the slide in. But this time I'm going to do something. I'm going to add a URL. And I'm going to put the history of the Coast Guard cutter Blackthorn. And this time I'm going to go and I'm going to look up the Coast Guard cutter Blackthorn. And I'm going to look, here we go. This is from the Coast Guard Historian's website. It's a PDF about the history of the Blackthorn. There it is. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL. In this case, it happens to be a PDF. I'm going to paste it over here in URL. Okay. It only displays a part, so if you hit the backspace, you can actually see the entire URL. Go ahead and hit return, and now whenever we play this, we can see that there is an actual link. Clicking on this link will actually take you to that page about the Blackthorn. This text comes from what I wrote here in the URL, and it links to the URL I put in the URL field.
One of my fellow company officers was clearly...
So that's how you can easily add URLs to an actual podcast and link them to relevant content. Now what I went ahead and did is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up the actual podcast I already created, and we're going to take a quick look. Now here is the track I have with all of the slides and the Commandant's speech. What I did was at the end was I clipped the audio at the end as soon as it was finished, because I had some extra information over there. And here you can take a look at the actual, here's the introduction, here's the Meet the Coast Guard family that I've added. Over here I've actually added a URL for the biography of the guest speaker, in this case Admiral Papp. So when you click on this, it takes you to the link of Admiral Papp's biography. Information about, if we move the playhead over here, I can show you, here's information about the Blackthorn. And here's information on the history of Seaman Apprentice William Flores, which takes you to the Coast Guard Historian's website and the page about Seaman Apprentice Flores. We can zoom in. Let me zoom in here. And we can actually see all the individual slides. Now, if you'd like, you can also move and reposition any of these slides at any moment. When you do that, you'll notice too that as I select them, down here it automatically selects which chapter, which marker that is. If I make an adjustment, you can see that the time down here changed. I'll do that again. So as I move these slides around, it automatically makes the corrections in the timeline and with the chapters and the movements of the actual slides. One of the things you also want to do is in this information window, by clicking the I in the lower right hand corner, you can add a description of what exactly the podcast is about. You can add the title, the artist. In this case I put Admiral Robert J. Papp Jr. because he's the speaker, and for the composer I put my own information in here, just to let people know that I created it, and if any questions can arise, they can come to me, and I have the original source material. The other thing is over here is the episode artwork. This is the artwork that actually displays when it's being viewed in iTunes. This is kind of like your album art. What does the CD cover look like? And it's right here. When it all is done with the podcast, I can actually, one of the things I did is I chose fade out. When you choose fade out, this volume indicator comes up, and that was actually missing there. And you can actually see this bar. This is our audio for the entire track. We can pull the audio down in some places if it needs to be, if something's too loud. We can make all those audio adjustments here. What I did here was, when the audience was clapping, instead of it ending abruptly, I took a piece here and I'm going to drop the audio down so it does a nice fade out. If you notice too, it kept playing until it reached this mark. This is in the master timeline up at the top. This actually marks the end of the podcast. If I put it right here, it'll end right at the end of the podcast. If I drag it a few seconds later, the audio will fade and then the actual podcast will end. It's really important that you need to mark the actual end of your podcast. If you're running into troubles when you're exporting this and you find out that it's only clipped, or if it only got like half of your podcast, it may be because this marker might be somewhere over here. And when you actually export it out, it'll do your entire timeline up until that point. So you want to make sure that this actually truly marks the end of your actual podcast. Now, one of the last steps is we're actually going to export and save this. So we're going to go up to Share and choose Export Podcast to Disk. Now here's something to be aware of. If you save it as an MP3, this will export only your audio. This will not export any of your slides, any of your links, or anything else. It's just strictly your audio. We're going to choose AAC encoder. AAC is basically another derivative of MPEG, except this allows for enhanced podcasts with voice, music, with the slides and everything that we need. Because this is spoken, we're going to choose a spoken podcast. This lowers the bit rate, so our ending file size is going to be about 17.6 megabytes. If this were a music podcast, it would be 35 megabytes, almost doubling our the size for the podcast. We like to keep this as small as possible while maintaining the highest amount of quality, so for a spoken lecture or podcast, we're going to choose the spoken podcast. Go ahead and set the artwork to the recommended size, and hit export. It'll ask you where you want to save your file and what you want to name it. I'm going to call this the 2012 Commandant's Leadership Address. I'm going to save it on my desktop. You'll see this go through a series. Now that the file's done and it's done the export the export process, we can go ahead and view the actual file. Here it is. It's 19.5 megabytes. And we can go ahead and import this directly into iTunes.
Good evening, shipmates. I'm just standing up
Now from here we can actually see the links and everything, and we can actually click on them. There they go. We can view all of our chapters that we've created, Meet the Coast Guard Family. And it'll play as one audio podcast. We can skip around from chapter to chapter. We can skip around from slide to slide. We can click on all of our links. And we can even view the information. Here's the information that we tagged in there. There's the artist that we had in there, our composer information. The one thing that it's not doing is it's showing up in our music library. To get it to show up in podcast, we're going to select the file and choose File, Get Information, or Command I on the keyboard. And we're just going to go over to Options, and under Media Kind, we're going to choose Podcast. Click OK. And as a result, there it is. Other thing too is you can change the album. So there we go. Here's the album art that I dragged into GarageBand. And again, if we play it,
Good evening, shipmates.
there it is. Everything is in there just as we had created.
Why aren't you
And that is how you create a podcast. My name is Petty Officer Nick Cangemi. If you have any questions,